Mr. Camel. What are you heading to?
I've never had blood before. What does it taste like? This isn't quite the vacation we thought it would be.
AfricaTrek is made possible in part by a grant from the Dayton-Hudson Foundation on behalf of Dayton's and Target stores, and by Burton Overseas, taking you to Africa and other adventure travel destinations.
Welcome to Tunis, my friend.
Thank you. The AfricaTrek expedition arrived in Tunisia in November 1992. Our plan was to set a world record for cycling across Africa, from the northernmost point of the continent to its southern tip, a total distance of nearly 12,000 miles.
I'd traversed 4 continents, and Africa seemed like a natural fifth. I viewed it as the most difficult one to cross, and I wanted to do that while I was still relatively young.
Initially, when Dan approached me about joining the team, he was looking for a physician. So that was my primary role, to be the team doc.
I never had grades high enough in high school to get my B average, which was the stipulation in the Buettner household to get a driver's license. So my main form of transportation was a bike until I was 18, and my parents could no longer hold that over me.
We knew from previous expeditions that having people familiar with the area we'd be traversing was important.
You ready to do this? Just roll it.
So we recruited 2 African partners. For the first half of the trek, our African teammate was Nigerian cyclist Mobolaji Oduyoye. The second half of the continent would be covered by Ugandan Mpyangu. What scares you most about the journey to come?
I mean, I could name a lot of things. I'm concerned about our acceptance by the Algerians.
I think the Sahara Desert's going to be our biggest challenge.
I'm concerned about crossing the desert.
The Sahara scares me a bit.
Losing our way, running out of water, getting ill. That's just crossing the desert.
Zaire scares me a little bit.
Once we cross the desert, I'm worried about malaria.
That Ebola virus and the AIDS virus.
Apart from that, I think I'm excited.
Nomad's land between Tunisia and Algeria, cruising along.
I think people sort of looked at us like we came from another planet. We had that tight-fitting, shiny lycra on, and these wraparound goggle glasses and big panniers on.
A typical scene of what happens when we arrive in a town. We instantly make friends.
And they had a hard time understanding why Americans would, first of all, come to a place where life is much more difficult, and then take a bike instead of something that made more sense, like a car or a bus, or heck, Americans take an airplane.
We were averaging between 70 to 80 miles a day, so it was hard riding, and it was along the coast into headwinds, up mountains. And I was really concerned the first week that I really wasn't cut out for that type of cycling.
One of the first things that happened was Chip went wailing down one of these curvy hills, and he lost it on one of the curves.
We're at the site of Chip Thomas's first crash and burn.
Thank God I'm okay.
So it looks like it was relatively harmless.
Yeah. And my front tire immediately blew out, and the rack just, the rack here.
Chip, could you reenact it for the camera?
How's your nerve, though? You gonna go as fast around hills anymore? I'm gonna walk down the hills now. Intersection of the first town in Algeria. Pretty sight.
At the Algerian border, Mobolaji was turned back. Nigeria, as it turns out, is not a well-liked country in either Western or Northern Africa. Mobolaji went back to Tunisia and spent another 6 days trying to get a visa. He ended up in jail because his Tunisian visa had expired, and he finally had to fly back to Lagos and meet up with us later. My bike was for sure the heaviest.
I remember being able to pick it up with one arm. But fully loaded, crossing the desert, the bike's weighed about 100 pounds?
Yeah, I think I had 35 liters of water, which is 77 pounds right there, so I was probably close to 140.
Bit of a late afternoon dust storm going here. See the dunes right up here. Approaching on the road. Whoa!
Water is such a precious commodity in the Sahara that when you look at the Michelin map, the existence of a well will appear almost as big as a city.
This stretch of road, I'm said to be so lonely that birds come along and accompany the humans. But yeah, man, we are like engulfed by the vastness of space here, you know? To go through large tracts of sand and then to come into a beautiful green oasis village where there were people, where there was life, where there was water, was just a real moving experience also for us.
Hey, Mr. Camel, what are you heading to?
There are just so few Westerners there, people from outside the Muslim world. You see people living a way that seems to be very ancient.
Coming darn close to another 100-mile day. I just got done doing 40 kilometers of this road right here. And I think I left my kidneys, half my vertebrae, back about 20 kilometers. This is one of the worst roads I've ever seen. I wanted to show you what it's like because a lot of people think that this is just fun. You know, we'll bike a little and see how fun it is. Here we go. Having fun yet? Yeah, sure. This is a great time. Oh, there goes a vertebrae. I got 20 more.
Ahead of us is paved road all the way from Morocco. How many miles?
I heard 200.
200 miles?
200 kilometers.
200 kilometers. We'll be there. I'm not anxious to repeat that. If the road south of Tamanrasset to Igizan is anything like that, we have some real hell awaiting us. Until we reached Tamanrasset, food was pretty easy. Every 200 or 300 miles we hit an oasis, and there were markets. You could buy oranges and tins of tuna and baguettes. At one point, I think we had 13 baguettes bungee corded to our rear racks.
This is what we're going to dine on this evening. Poulet au légumes. Let's show for our Arabic friends, yeah? Right.
We'll be drinking coffee out of this in about 6 minutes.
And then after much research, we found Ambassador chocolate to be the best. There's about 20 kinds. Most Algerian chocolate's the type that you're tempted to put a wick into and read by at night.
Put a little snot in there.
Yeah, that helps with the luster.
During the winter months, when we were there, December and January, temperatures at night would plummet below freezing.
Was the water in those pans frozen this morning?
No.
So it's warming up here in Africa.
During the day, though, the temperature would skyrocket to 90, even 100 degrees. So you had these wild variations in temperature.
Wind's not too bad, but there's an incredible fog and a lot of traffic. It's dangerous out here. Only suitable for the fit or the weird. That must be the latter. Well, it's supposed to be dry in the Sahara.
From what we'd heard, virtually all traffic had been cut off south of a place called Tamanrasset. There was a conflict going on between nomadic Tuaregs and the governments of Niger and Mali to the south. Not only did we face the possibility of being attacked by these Tuaregs, a bigger fear for us was striking off south of Tamanrasset, 400 miles of raw open desert, and getting lost. If you look on a map, you can see a red line stretching southward, which tells me there's a road there. But then when we got there, what we found was this 30-mile wide band of truck tracks. If we had taken one of the wrong tracks, we would have ended up like a piece of beef jerky on the sand. No water, no food. Standing there, I mean, your big fear is, am I taking the right track? There's just subtle things like that that make you want to rethink what you're doing. But we had worked 2 years to put this thing together. We at least needed to give it a try. We didn't hit any bad sandstorms until about 100 miles south of Tamanrasset, and then they hit us hard. These sandstorms would literally sandblast the top layers of your skin.
Oh my God. Yes. Chip will never operate again.
We took to wearing ski masks and putting on these heavy Gore-Tex jackets, even though in the middle of the day temperatures might be close to 100 degrees. Sand got in our gears and our packs and in every crevice, if you know what I mean. What finally made us turn around and go back was this French couple who came speeding back northward. The only vehicle we had heard that made it all the way to the border. It came speeding back. It was a Peugeot. It was riddled with bullet holes. After a lot of soul searching, we decided that we would accomplish nothing if we went and got shot. Without a doubt, it was the smart thing to do because we were clearly crossing the line between risky adventure and stupidity.
We hitched a truck ride back to Algiers. From there, we flew to Niamey, Niger, where our African teammate Mobolaji rejoined us.
I was just like looking on both sides of the road and, you know, like taking in everything with so much joy and happiness.
He's a medicine man in Niamey, Niger, and last night he said that we all had bad vibes and he was gonna exercise us.
Come on.
He doesn't want.
This way.
No. Wait. He doesn't want. No.
I'm being chased by the sheep. Before entering Nigeria, I read a quote by Chinua Achebe, one of Nigeria's greatest writings, that went, only a masochist with an exuberant taste for self-violence would choose Nigeria as a holiday.
That's f***ing crazy driving, damn it. I'm gonna get killed on this road.
We were
bicycling in a particularly humid part of Nigeria.
Yeah, man.
And we had headwinds. I start smelling roadkill, and I'm looking around for it to see what got hit this time. And on the side of the road, as we pass over it, I look to the right, and here I see the pancaked form of what used to be something. And I look closer, and it turns out it was a human being. I stopped, and I said, "Chip," I said, "you know what you just bicycled over?" I said, "That's a human body there."
I guess, my Western sensibilities just couldn't comprehend it. Dan and Steve asked someone why it was that they just, left this body in the bush to decompose, and the person they asked said, well, he was from another village, and they say he was a crazy man.
I didn't eat that day.
With Mobolaji, we're here at Miss Wosalat Kazim Market here. And this is a sample of the foods that are eaten. Mobolaji, go ahead. Why don't you explain what we got here?
Right here we have yams. From yams you make pounded yam.
That's very good. Thanks.
One day we were near Enugu, and a chief had taken us around his village, and we were talking about food, and I nearly sat down on a yam, which is this enormous tuber.
It's sacrilegious to sit on yam or to stand on yam.
Yes, this is our produce. We farm for ourselves.
And he stopped me quick, and I said, well, what's wrong with sitting on a yam? And he said, well, you wouldn't bite your mother's nipple, would you? The point being that yams are such a staple food that they're almost precious.
This is your wife?
Yes, this is my wife.
Why don't you bring her over and introduce her to us? Okay.
She's a housewife.
Oh, okay.
We don't go along with our housewives.
The wife stays in the home.
Stays in the home.
And pounds yam.
If there's yam.
Okay.
If there's no yam,
Women are really the fabric of African society. They seem to do most of the work.
Can we see your wife's house?
My wife says, no, we don't enter a man. If another man doesn't enter our, it's our law.
Oh, okay.
If I see any man in my wife's house,
You kill him.
I call the police.
They didn't seem to have any of the privileges, and they were still expected to serve the man. The last day in Nigeria, we crossed the river called the Cross River. The road stopped altogether. We took dugout canoes. We traded cassette tapes and T-shirts for passage. When we got to the other side, we met a chief of the Mbembe tribe who so liked us that night he crowned us all princes.
You can call me Prince Chip. Prince Dr. Chip. Dr. Prince Chip.
These little children here were just telling me about sleeping sickness and what this village is doing to lower the risk of sleeping sickness is they put up these little tents. Have a white sort of mosquito netting, and underneath there's colors which attract the tsetse fly. It is so used to this black milk. It likes black. Yes, it likes black.
What was distressing about these, though, is that our bicycle shorts were the same color, so black and purple, and attracted a like number of tsetse flies as these traps did.
Oh boy.
I've noticed you've been pretty slow the last few days.
Yeah, I'm not feeling too well.
You got a cold, or do you got malaria, or?
No, a cold, I think.
Oh yeah?
Flu.
In Cameroon, Mobolaji came down with his first case of malaria, and we treated him with mefloquine, and that made him sicker than the malaria.
Oh, show them this collage we just did.
Oh, the collage is way cool. It's way cool. And on the back it says, "Can you find the malaria sufferers in these photographs?" It's clearly Mobolaji Oduyoye.
Welcome to breakfast in the Central African Republic. Last night we slept in this small village. This morning the woman
brought us some water. We've been staying in these small villages, mud brick shacks with thatched roofs. They live very poor. This is probably the poorest country we've seen.
This is the family we stayed with last night.
None of these villages have stores, or many of them, in fact, don't even have water.
This is their food. The crickets, maniac, and centipedes.
The women do most of the work while the men sort of hang out. Last night when we rolled into town, they were red-eyed and slurring drunk. This trough will fill with pine sap, which is later drained out of a hole in the bottom. It's got a sweet, sour smell to it, which within just an hour or two has an alcohol content, which will get you pleasantly drunk. The Central African Republic is probably the most expensive country we've seen, and probably the most expensive in all of Africa. It's expensive for us, so you can imagine what it's like for these people who have no visible source of income. Teacher we met last night hasn't been paid for over 6 months. None of the civil servants or the government workers have been paid, so things are pretty tough. We picked up a new teammate here in the Central African Republic. He was about to be grilled, and I bought him for about as much as it would have cost me to buy his meat, $1.89. And this is him. We call him Elmer. He's been living on the back of my bike for the past 3 days. His mother served as monkey sandwiches for several people. When I found the little critter, his mommy was laying spread eagle on the grill. He's been a good companion, but it's the end of the road for him right now.
So I found a Peace Corps worker,
Come on.
and the Peace Corps worker introduced me to the family who wanted the monkey as a pet.
Mais non mange pas.
They promised me that Elmer would never end up to the side of a cook pot.
Bon, merci.
That was great.
Okay, I'm rolling.
Welcome to Zaire, the country that everybody's dreaded and everybody's warned us about for the past 5,000 miles.
The team really thought that Zaire was just going to be a devastating experience psychologically, just because of the war happening there and the poverty level, the devastation. But it was kind of like a triumph for me. By that point in the trip, I had discovered what I needed to keep my energy level up. So I was riding really well. I was generally out in front.
Nice road we're taking here, boys.
One has to have a pretty loose definition of road to call the tracks in Zaire roads. Zaire was 900 miles long, at least our route was, and there's only about 150 miles of paved road in the entire country. So it was truly one of the most difficult areas I've ever cycled across.
Thorn bush has already caused one flat tire, quite possibly more.
Here comes the rains.
Given that it rains almost every single day in the rainy season, what was once road is quickly reduced to a slew of mud.
Steve's been bitten by a tsetse fly already this morning.
All day long, there'd be a constant hum of insects. I remember crossing one river, and it was completely covered with moths, and as we bicycled by the road, we kicked up the moths. We actually had to wear bandanas to keep from inhaling moths. There were so many of them.
Not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 flat tires.
All right.
What a happy day.
We've been bicycling hard for a long time, 2 or 3 months. The conditions were getting worse. Our bikes were starting to show the fatigue of having 6,000 miles on them.
We all have wounds, cuts and scrapes and bruises. I weighed myself yesterday and found out that I weighed 20 pounds less than I did when I started this trip. And I feel like it too. I feel weak and tired.
We were kind of sick of each other and sick of Africa. And you really got the feeling that we might never get out of here.
We have 60 kilometers of the most hellish road I've ever seen, till we even get to a regular kind of dirt road.
We're completely out of food, except for a power bar hidden.
So we ate the only thing we could find, and that was usually just bananas. Since we're burning about between 6,000 and 8,000 calories a day, we had to eat a lot of bananas. And I figured on the average day, our team consumed 145 bananas. They got pretty tiresome, but boy, were we regular.
This isn't quite the vacation we thought it would be.
Though it was the most difficult, you also had the feeling that this was the epitome of modern day adventure. If you make it out of that and you look back, you say, oh, well, that wasn't that tough, actually, you know. I made it through. Good thing to brag about at the bars, you know.
About 2/3 the way into Zaire, we took a turn into the Ituri forest. This is a part of Africa that Henry Morton Stanley called Darkest Africa. And after about 2 days of following just a little game track, we came one day onto a small band of pygmies. Based on how they reacted, I don't think they'd seen a white man. At first they were frightened. The women all scampered into the bush, while the men sort of thrust out their chests and bravely came up and offered us their hand. And I felt like Gulliver, this enormous being among these short people. In most places, they've been assimilated into local towns. The Ituri Forest is one of the few places where they still live the way they have for millennia.
These are what they hunt with. It's a very well done bow and arrow. I see he uses leaves as for the feather here.
We had no common language, but we had a mutual mystification, I think. We tried to communicate, and I showed them the map of Africa, which I don't think they understood at all. And it's one of the few places left on Earth where you can still hold a crowd of people absolutely spellbound by producing a flame from a stick of plastic. They're semi-nomadic hunters. They're also some of the few people who can live in a rainforest and not have to chop the whole thing down. They built these temporary camps and move from camp to camp as their hunting needs and or the season required them. They also smoke prodigious amounts of marijuana. My, they seem to be a happy people.
Mountains of the Moon. We'll be crossing those into Uganda tomorrow.
An incredibly welcoming and beautiful sight for us after laboring long and hard through the dense jungles of Zaire.
Leaving Zaire was like escaping from prison. The jungles of that country gave way to green fields in Uganda. Uganda is almost painfully green. The soil is so fertile there that the people say they have the fastest chickens in the world because if they don't peck up the corn quick enough that's thrown to them, it sprouts and starts to grow. The people there, I think, have the most optimistic outlook. It just had this feeling of renaissance. The reason for that, I think, is after nearly a decade of terror under Idi Amin, a new president has taken power there, a guy by the name of Museveni. We cycled continuously for 32 days crossing the Central Africa. before we reached Kampala. And when we got there, we were tattered, our bikes were about ready to fall apart, we were sick and underweight, and we got to Kampala, and for 2 weeks we did nothing but sleep and eat.
We'll let you slide your bikes right in here.
It was here too where Mobolaji sort of handed off the baton to Micheal Mpyangu. We picked up the second African on our team. We had a chance to look a little bit at Michael's way of life. He was a leather worker. He worked in a very modest sort of garage with very, very few possessions. And yet he was a well-educated, self-educated, spoke 3 languages, was a great dancer, in fact a national champion in dancing, and he was a black belt in Taekwondo.
I was a Boy Scout and Adventure Scout, and my experience is that every time people get together, it's interesting, but sometimes difficult.
I have a lot of respect for Micheal Mpyangu. He didn't talk about it a lot, but when he did, you hear horror stories about how his life was during Idi Amin. After watching a movie once, and it was a shoot-'em-up New York gangster movie, I said, you see how bad New York can be, kind of jokingly, like, you know, look at this is how they portray the United States. And he said, Steve, that's nothing. He says, when you jump in a bush to hide yourself, and above you, you hear a colonel say, kill everything that moves, including the dogs. And know that everybody's being slaughtered in your village right now. But if you move, you'll be killed. That's tough.
In Kampala, there's a battalion of cyclists who haul meat around. They carry these enormous boxes on the backs of their bikes, and they can get a whole half a cow in there, and they'll travel from restaurant to restaurant delivering steaks.
Andrew Mpanga.
His name is Andrew Mpanga.
Ngaba muchirunga 10 wo 15.
He carries about 140 to 150 kilograms per route, 6 days a week.
Does he like his job?
He likes his job.
People use bicycles to get by, and instead of the pollution, the din, and the confusion we saw in Western Africa with the traffic, the main thing you hear on the highways in Uganda is the purr of bicycles going by.
Just keep biking, I'll film you.
We cycled out of Uganda into Kenya over beautifully paved roads and rolling hills. At one point we dipped into the Rift Valley and back out again, and then into Nairobi, the capital city. Often when we think of East Africa, we think of the safari land. But to approach the skyline of Nairobi, you hardly believe you're in Africa. When we got there, we spent 2 weeks. We had all sorts of things we had to do, and our hangout was this trattoria where you could sit on the sidewalk and sip cappuccino.
We were sedentary for a while, and for me, the bicycle expedition meant movement. Where Dan was saying, no, the important thing is that we accomplish all of our objectives. And we had it out.
No matter what we say, and no matter what our interests are and what our wishes are, you're going to make sure that we don't make it there by the time we want to be.
But I don't want to get into a move-on fever. South Africa it's a historic time there, and we're there at the right place at the right time. I want to see the countryside. I want to talk to people, both white and black. I want to get good interviews, and I want to finish this thing up right.
I felt that the original goal that I had for the expedition didn't count. So I felt, well, okay, well, I'll continue on with the expedition, but I'm in it for the miles, and I'm not really in it to make sure that Dan gets all of his objectives done. And so it was punching the clock.
Since wildlife really doesn't know man-made boundaries, we were pedaling right by lions and elephant and Cape buffalo.
It was jamming. it was definitely, it was wonderful. It was great.
Can you show us a little bit in your village?
The Maasai are a Neolithic tribe who were known as warriors. They're one of the few tribes in East Africa that have resisted largely efforts of missionaries to convert them to Christianity. They were never completely subdued by the colonialists and have fiercely held on to their traditions.
He's a shepherd. With sheep or with cows?
Yes.
With cows. How many cows does he have? He has 1,000 cows? What kinds of foods do you eat?
Milk and meat and blood.
Meat and blood?
Yes.
What kind of blood?
Cow's blood, goat's blood, sheep's blood.
And how do you, I've never had blood before, how do you drink blood?
Put milk so that you drink.
You put milk with the blood?
Yes.
Okay, what does it taste like?
It tastes nice.
It does?
Yes.
Adolescent boys still have to kill a lion to enter adulthood. In fact, one kid even showed me the scars he got killing one of the lions.
Oh, I saw that. That's from a lion.
The most ubiquitous article of clothing on the continent is the used American t-shirt. But to come up to these Maasai with these flowing earth tone robes and these enormous spears and these great sort of hairdos, you really felt like you were experiencing Africa. We wanted to bike to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, and we cycled up about 6,000 feet to a gate and returned away. So we cycled back down about 120 miles out of the way to meet with the head of Tanzanian wildlife. When we saw him, we asked him, he said no.
Look at that. Oh, there goes those clean new chains.
As kind of a consolation prize, he waived the $400 fee to walk up Kilimanjaro. And Mike and Chip don't like the cold, so they decided to go to Zanzibar instead.
Today we had to hire 2 porters and 1 guide to climb up the mountain with us. I'm told it gets so steep and slippery up there, you have to have these porters. It's 20 below on the peak, so we're told, but we'll find out.
Because Kilimanjaro rises so abruptly out of the savanna, you go almost from sea level to 19,000 feet, and you feel the effects of altitude are amplified because of that.
Burning up the wood on Mount Kilimanjaro. Jumbo, over 1 million pounds a year gets burnt up just like this to make porridge and hot tea for tourists. These guys do the cooking. Live at 12,300 feet. Tourists are staggering around dizzy and vomiting. These guys are laughing.
I had already bicycled about 9,000 miles and could get on my bike and pedal 100 miles with very little effort, yet at some of the higher altitudes on Kilimanjaro, just putting one foot in front of another was as exhausting as an all-out sprint at sea level.
I feel like someone just stuck a nitrogen oxide nozzle in my ear and put it on full blast. I feel lightheaded. If it wasn't for a slight pain in my chest, and in fact I'm out of breath, it'd be kind of fun actually.
From a car accident, I had a heart attack, and I started feeling the same way I did from that heart attack. I also have a disease called Meniere's disease that hit me. And I kept pushing and pushing and pushing.
He's probably the most physically fit of all the people in our family, and I saw him reduced to stumbling and falling like he was punch drunk.
I made it up to within 1,000 feet of the summit.
I said that I wasn't going to go any further because I knew he would continue pushing himself to the point where he'd be in danger his life.
And I decided to hang it up and to walk down. It was one of the most difficult decisions of the trek for me.
And I walked up with the next team, and I can remember walking across the glaciers on top of Mount Kilimanjaro, completely exhausted, drunk from the altitude, you're drunk in a way where everything is beautiful. Everything is so beautiful, and you're trying to capture this on film because you go, it's got to be beautiful for everybody else too. So I'm trying to hold steady enough to film and do zooms of these glacial cathedrals, and I can remember trying to hold my breath so I get a steady shot, and not being able to do that. And I just said, well, forget this, I'm going to the top, and I just made it to the top. And
I can hardly think straight. Almost to the peak. Yeah, I don't know if I can make it.
I think maybe the fact that the altitude was affecting me, and I felt this well of emotion that I had, and all the time and effort and all the conflicts I've been into with my brother about getting done on time were wasted, and I poured it out.
It's an incredible moment. Every year I get older and I start thinking that I should be doing something more long-term with my life. Planting roots, having a family. But maybe if you live to the fullest, then things fall in order. Later on in life. I don't know. So I should probably count my blessings and be thankful for what I've done, like climbing to the top of Africa. I wish my brother was here. There it comes. Oh, cool.
Yeah, the sun is coming. For me, the greatest triumph of that whole Kilimanjaro experience was meeting a fellow named Yohani Laul on the way down. He's 125 years old. How does he feel now? There's a plaque commemorating Yohani Laul. He was the first man to ever climb Mount Kilimanjaro. But he never got any of the credit. Man he guided up, named Hans Meyer, a German, has taken credit for all these years.
we found Malawi to be a beautiful country. It was more of a vacation spot for us. Jumbo.
Until just months before we came to the Mozambican border, it was impossible to cross that country. Approaching me from the back here in the Tet corridor in Mozambique are UN troops. They patrol here. There's a road called the Tet corridor, but because of the violence and the shooting, it's more commonly called the Machine Gun Alley. For 30 years, Mozambique has been in a state of war. There are more active landmines than any other place in the world. It's just a dangerous place to be.
Hello again. Have a good journey. Thank you.
Not more than 20 miles across the border, you come across a United Nations refugee camp that probably houses 100 to 200 families.
Something like 3 million refugees from this war live on the sides of the road in these awful camps. Camps where there are no latrines, so as you approach the camp, you walk through human excrement. And disease is rife and food is hard to come by. Here we saw little kids eating rat kebabs to get by. Most of the impression that we have of Africa being a starving continent is not true, but this was one of the only points that, for us anyway, it was certainly true.
They say the greatest sub-Saharan civilization lived here.
One of the great tourist attractions in Zimbabwe is the Great Zimbabwe Ruins. As we cycled into it, in fact, Lady Di was riding out. We sort of waved at each other. It was a great brush with stardom. The Great Zimbabwe Ruins is a testimonial to African ingenuity long before the white men came. The ruins date back to about the 13th century, and it was home to some 20,000 Shona people who had an agricultural system that fed everyone, and their buildings are still standing today, 800 years later.
Now you're Shona.
Yes.
Your ancestors, in fact, may have lived right here.
That's right. We met this modern-day Shona guide who told me a little bit about the history of his people.
Can you tell us some of the customs and traditions that you have that 12th century Shona had as well?
Yes. When I married, I asked my father-in-law, and when he agrees, he will charge me so many heads of cattle, so much money in order to let me marry his daughter.
Are you married, Moses?
Yes.
And how much did you pay for your wife? What was her Ebola?
I paid 4 heads of cattle and $70 as Ebola.
How long ago was that?
That was in 1965.
Okay.
Yes.
And is that a lot of money to pay for a wife, or is that a big price, or a normal price?
Then it was big price, but it's small potatoes to compare to the today's Ebola.
The last country. South Africa.
I had a fear going into the country of South Africa. I mean, it wasn't the free new South Africa that it is now.
We first felt tension when we crossed the border. Chip had kind of strayed away from the line, the passport line. He was checking out a car, and some dog trained to attack blacks lurched out at Chip.
So I mean, that was the first experience that I had when I came into the country.
There's all this barbed wire in front of their sign. Yeah, thanks.
On the one hand, it was like, for me, the realization of a dream. I've always wanted to see South Africa. I mean, since the time of my political awakening, when I learned of Mandela, the struggle of the ANC. So I was really excited to be there.
Johannesburg is like the New York City of South Africa. There are 50-story high-rises, Kentucky Fried Chickens, Pizza Hut, and television. The first time I ever saw Beavis and Butthead was in South Africa. There's an area full of coffee houses and record shops that looks like Soho in New York. It's really a wonderful place in the center, at least by our standards.
Oh my God, they have porta potties for their bathrooms.
Soweto, on the other hand, is a sprawling city of something like 7 million people who, in many areas, live in situations more difficult than people who lived in the bush in Central Africa.
Where do you get the coal dust?
The coal dust from the coal yard.
Okay, and do you have to pay for it?
No.
It's free?
For nothing.
Okay.
Because they just throw it away.
And you mix it with mud and then make these. Do you burn this yourself or do you sell it?
No, I don't sell it. I'm using it for myself because the coal are too expensive. I haven't got money to buy coal.
Is this a common thing, or was this kind of your idea?
No,
do people all over Soweto do
No, this is only of our ideas because we haven't got money. We are not working. There's no job at all.
Do you think things will get better here in Soweto, or are they going to get worse?
Perhaps it can be like that.
Get better?
Exactly.
I hope so.
Yes.
Dan originally approached me about taking part in this trip, he had in his prospectus a letter of support written by F.W. Clark, which said, if you make it this far, we will welcome you with open arms into our country. And sure enough, he came out and extended that symbolic welcoming to us. So I thought that was a nice gesture. I remember looking at the video thinking, my shirt tail's out.
I think I was most affected by Sisulu, the deputy president of the ANC, a fellow who had spent 25 years in prison with Nelson Mandela.
When Mike and I walked into the room, he embraced us, he hugged us, he stood up and hugged us, and said something to the effect of, welcome my brothers, to South Africa.
To find this man who had endured incredible racism and suffering his whole life. In fact, 11 days before we met him, somebody tried to assassinate him. He narrowly escaped. But I sensed no bitterness.
One state, one flag, one people. That is what we believe in.
That was the thing about South Africa. It was a lot more complex, complicated than I was led to believe.
Are there interracial marriages in northern South Africa that you know of? It doesn't happen.
Do you mean in South Africa? In the whole of South Africa?
No, in this area.
part, no.
Are you a supporter of the ANC? Do you know what that is?
Yes, African National Congress.
And you say Mandela's going to be the next president?
Yes.
What do you think is going to happen to South Africa when he becomes president?
It's going to be a peaceful country.
This school has black and white and colored people. Do you look at this boy any different than this boy, both of whom are African?
No.
I think there are many of us here who are going to give all they've got to see if the future of this country can be a great one for everybody. It's not going to be easy. I don't think anybody thinks it's going to be easy. But at least our children will inherit the jewel that is South Africa.
I think each of my inner tubes has at least 10 patches on it.
Yeah, I think we're probably over 200 in flat tires, huh?
At least.
You know what Sunday this is, don't you?
The last Sunday that I'll be on a bicycle in Africa.
That's right.
Yeah, little things like that don't pass me by.
The second to the last day of Africa, we turned the road that headed directly to Cape Agulhas. It was the last road we would be on. And it counted down from 95 kilometers every 10 kilometers to the end. And it was an incredible experience to see the end count down.
It was euphoria. You knew you had succeeded. And the rest of the way was metaphorically downhill. Actually, I'm standing here right now at the southernmost city on the continent of Africa. It's called Cape Agulhas. And as soon as I hang up with you all, my partners, my brother Steve, Dr. Chip Thomas, and Ugandan Micheal Mpyangu, are going to cycle about a mile away past the lighthouse, dip our front wheels in the water, and thus claim the Guinness World Record for traversing the entire continent of Africa. 11,832 miles and 272 pretty grueling days on the road. Let me put it to you this way. We spent about 2,400 hours on a bicycle seat wherein we make contacts with about 9 square inches of surface area, so I'll let your imagination answer that question. Chip, as the first black man to ever cycle across Africa, how does it feel?
Exhilarating. It's very exciting. There were times that I thought I would never make it, but I'm actually here and I'm enchanted. I mean, it's a great feeling.
I feel good. I feel great. The fact that we've accomplished this hasn't really sunk in yet.
It was an incredible relief, joy that you'd made it safe, feeling of accomplishment. Then again, there was this feeling of this hollowness that you had that you had completed this goal and you're all of a sudden rudderless. So you have this wide range of emotions playing on you at one time.
Taking a year off to ride from the top to the bottom of Africa was an opportunity to stop and reflect on my life up to this point. See Africans who were getting on with their lives, and to be reminded that we're not so isolated in our work where we are, that there is a bigger world that exists and people are struggling with their own problems and people have their own joys and victories, and to just be a part of that and witness that, that was a wonderful, stimulating experience.
I spent a year of my life really grabbing life by the horns and truly living it, not letting it pass you by. And I think no matter what I do for the next few decades, I'll always look back and say that was one year that I really lived.
All right, man, cool.
Cut!
AfricaTrek was made possible in part by a grant from the Dayton-Hudson Foundation on behalf of Dayton's and Target stores, and by Buettner Overseas, taking you to Africa and other adventure travel destinations.